name is Cori, and I work full time at Brightside Bookshop in Flagstaff, Arizona. And my primary responsibilities are I do the buying of our books and some inventory management, but I also spend time out on our sales floor working with customers. And I handle a lot of our social media. So if you like it, great. If not, I guess you can tell me. And then as we start dipping back into events, that has also been added to my plate. So here I am. I was one of our first events post COVID. And personally, I've always been a fan of Nicole's. She didn't. I don't think she really knew that I was sharing. I actually own pretty much all of her books, and I've been a fan since a friend of mine loaned me a copy of Quench Your Thirst with Salt. So that was my first introduction to Nicole. And so when we got in our advanced copy of Processed Meats, that was handed over to me immediately. And then when Michelle reached out and asked if we wanted to do an event, I said, absolutely. And I would love to help out with that. So I will be kind of guiding things tonight with Nicole, asking her some questions and fielding questions from you all. And so, with no further ado, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Nicole, and then I'm going to hand off to her and stop talking for a while. So, Nicole is the author, of course, of her brand new book, Processed Meats Essays on Food, Flesh, and Navigating the Disaster. Happy birthday to your book, Nicole. And she's also written Sustainability, a Love Story, and the collaborative collection, The After Normal Brief Alphabetical Essays on a Changing Planet. She previously published the books Where the Tiny Things Are, Egg, Micrograms, and of course, Quench Your Thirst with Salt, and This Noisy Egg. She edited she edited the Bloomsbury, the essay collection Science of Story with Sean Prentice in Bending Genre, essays on creative nonfiction with Margot Singer. She's the co-president of Nonfiction Now and is a recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Award and a noted author in Best American Essays. Her work is most recently published in the New York Times, Long Reads, and Manifestation. She currently teaches at Northern Arizona University here in Flagstaff, Arizona. Welcome, Nicole.
Oh, Cori, thank you so much. I had no idea. I had no idea that you'd read all my books. That makes me so happy. We haven't met in person until 10 days ago, maybe, when I went into Brightside to buy more books. And I saw Cori there, and she was just saying, "Are you Nicole?" And you know how it is these days when you go in anywhere with a mask. So it's really impressive that she could tell who I was with just my eyeballs. I'm so honored that she is here to host this event. And again, thanks Michelle and to Tori House and Brightside for collaborating on tonight's event. I was also telling Cori, which maybe y'all heard everything we said, but I have never done a book launch on Zoom before. And there are great things about Zoom. I really feel like people can come from across the country that otherwise couldn't be here. That makes me really, really happy, but I'm really, really sad that I can't see your face and we can't hang out and have cheese and wine after. So we will do that, I think, hopefully sometime soon this summer. I have some actual in-person events scheduled, one in Torrey, Utah, where Tori House's name comes from, and some of its publishers and editors are, call home or second home. And that's at the Entrada Institute on June 5th. So if you want cheese and wine, you should come there then. And then we'll see what we do at my house in the next few months. I really, really miss seeing people and having festivities, whether they're about books or not. Okay, so I'm really excited to release this book. It's been a long time coming. I've worked on it for a while, but I think it came out at exactly the right time. I've been working with Kirsten at Tori House, and this book is a lot about disasters. And you might say, it's about disasters imagined. Some of them like Y2K, when we thought the world might collapse and then it didn't. And then there's the personal disasters, like the the small disasters. That was terrible. Max is supposed to come in. Come, where you at? You didn't wear it in the screen. Oh, he's the worst. Come on. We're working on this. We have a whole shtick planned, but ill-planned to say the least. So point. All right. He's fired. I need a new crew. But one of the disasters is, this idea of not having children necessarily, but how to raise them in a world that seems ever more precarious. And maybe because of social media, or maybe because of just my attention to outer concerns, that everything about having kids seemed more and more stressful as time went on. The piece I'm going to read tonight is about Zoe, who was my firstborn. And when she was born 7 weeks early. So she was really tiny. And if you want to know all of the attendant disasters that attended her existence and her birth, you can read the book. But there's also this part where when she was about 1.5, that the doctor measured her head and it was 106% of normal. And this is why Zoe is not at this particular reading, because she doesn't need me to talk about her head that much. It's still really big. But it was so big that the doctor thought she might have hydroencephalitis. And so she had to have an MRI. And again, this is after a lot of issues. She'd been born early. She had been back in the hospital with RSV. And at some point, and this is, I think, Kate, is a testament to my personality, you start to sort of take things maybe a little glibly, and maybe you take them a little bit like, well, it's just another disaster. It's going to be fine. And I feel like I've become sort of accepting of disasters to some degree, and recognizing that they come our way, and that there are things you can do to survive them that aren't really, some of them healthier than others. But one I really believe in is building a strong community. So mainly I want to say thank you to you all for being here and being part of that community. I think that's the primary way we're going to make it through whatever happens next, and the way that we made it through what's still happening. And hopefully, if I was a Catholic, I would do this. I don't know if I would do that, because I don't know exactly if that means good luck. Good luck to everyone with the cross. But my Catholic upbringing notwithstanding, I do think that being together, being part of a group, knowing where your people are, is the best way to wend our way through these various tragedies and travesties. All right, so speech over. I'm going to read on the screen, and I think that's cool because my eyes go where your eyes are. But if it doesn't work that way, I apologize in advance. I'm not going to read very long tonight, because we really want to have a conversation, speaking of community, and Cori has questions prepared, and we really want to open it to y'all who have been so generous to come tonight. So I'm just going to read for about 5 or 6 minutes. I'm reading, I'll tell you which page, if y'all are of the read along type and you already have your book, which some of you, that would be cheating because the book didn't come out till today. It's on page 108. And it's the chapter Dissociation, the Natural Order. As if thinking the worst will stave it off. As if making a list of bad, worse, and worst will in some way hedge your superlative bets against the poles of news. I'm interested in the politics of thought, in the methodology behind wishing, in figuring out how to go against nature, and figuring out how to let nature run its course, the difference between right thought and right action. There is chicken on the bone. There is chicken off the bone. Chicken on the bone is all the chicken I'd want in all its decadent renderings. By all, I mean one, fried chicken. There are many bone-in chicken recipes like chicken hindquarters and port and cream, barbecued chicken, buffalo wings, though they may be a kind of fried. But fried chicken is a testament to the beauty of the disarticulated chicken. Every piece a handhold, every piece its own integrity. The coating wraps a thigh like snow, a breast like a scarf, a leg like a stocking to protect it from the cruel world of hot oil. Frying chicken is the nicest thing you can do to a dead chicken. But there are some who cannot eat the chicken on the bone. Breast of chicken, boneless thighs, cubed in korma, roll of cordon bleu, that's doable. At the bar, spicy drummet in my right hand, hot sauce on my cheek, a pile of bones in front of me, I turn to my friend Andrew, who will not eat the bony chicken, but is currently eating chicken tenders. I do not comprehend his reluctance. It's the same thing, I argue. It's not. He pushes my plate of sticky bones further away. But you eat meat, chicken, steak, I say. I prefer hamburger, he says. Perhaps he does not like the resistance of muscle. Hamburger is muscle turned to vegetable. You don't want to think muscle. You want to chew very little. You want to swallow before you can think about the sad doe eyes. In the face of the accusing animal, you can solidly deny you knew what you were doing. But what's worse? Finding joy in licking the rib clean, of polishing the bone, or letting the process happen behind closed doors for you by a grinder, a man in a once white apron, by knives and forks not your own. You brought only your mouth to the table, but it masticates to the same beat as mine. I stream bad thoughts. I try to see how much I can take. I put into my head images of my hip blown open by a landmine. I see myself apart from myself. I can see the wide-angle lens version of the bomb. I can see the close-up of the wound. I think about the splat sound my body makes as it hits the concrete from 100 stories above. I think plane crash. I think explosion. I think burning skin and how it might smell like frying chicken. I think these thoughts to get other worse thoughts out of my head. I don't want Zoe to get sick again. I don't want her to be in the hospital. I don't want her to be in pain. I don't want her to cough. So I imagine the insides of my body turned outside, my femur open to mercurial winds. An open wound seen from above is a bloody version of a daughter. Didn't you always want to see what the inside of a chicken looked like anyway? My imagination is not as strong as it could be. I look only to my body, only to my child's body. If I could have a less myopic vision, perhaps I could have envisioned whole hordes of humans sick, prone, ventilated. I could have imagined the cruelty of letting some people die so others could pretend nothing bad ever happens at all. Perhaps I could imagine how many people have died so the facade of the white American dream could be perpetuated. But I kept bargaining for a worry-free life. I should have bargained for a bigger brain with a bigger imagination to avoid pity, to stave off self-pity. Here's what should have been the method. Think the worst first. There are many degrees of vegetarian. No meat can ever have touched that pan, to a little chicken broth won't kill me. The first kind of vegetarian matches up nicely with the carnivore who avoids bone. The second I can invite to dinner. When Zoe is scheduled for her MRI, I stop talking to her. She's 1.5 and doesn't talk much anyway, but before they scheduled the MRI, when I changed her diaper, I used to tell her about the hawk that sometimes sits in the tree outside her window. It's one of the only words she's learned to say. At 1.5, she should be able to say something like 200 words, maybe even to make a sentence, their hawk or hawk flies. I used to tell her, between naming her elbows and her knees, about the time there were so few hawks the squirrels overran the park that even the dogs were scared to run loose for fear the squirrels would gang up on them and attack. I used to tell her, in between naming the zipper on her sleeper and button on her shirt, about how a chemical they sprayed to keep mosquitoes to a minimum ended up poisoning the hawks too. I told her, between trying to convince her to say the k sound of sock rather than just saw, 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 that now the birds are back and so are the mosquitoes. I used to tell her, between buckling her shoe and picking her up to look outside for the red tail, that now the mosquitoes will probably bring us down with their West Nile, or the hawks forecast an avian flu infected chicken, which will topple us quicker than any invading army. I used to tell her about the way an owl could turn his head almost all the way around, the way the peregrine falcon flies faster than a cheetah can run, that the big brown girl hawk in the tree is being chased by the smaller boy hawk because he loves her, but they'll never get together because he's red and she's all brown and they just don't match, a lot like her socks. But now I can't say any of this, even look her in the eye. It's better this way, I figure. If she's already lost to me, if I'm already lost to her, if this magnet that determines her brain is not normal human, we'll have to move to isolate poles where the only bird that will trouble her will be the penguin, and the only bird to trouble me will be regret. So I button her shirt and smile, but I cannot bring myself to say a word. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you so much. I hear the roaring applause. See, that's the hard thing about Zoom is, you live off the audience interactions, and here I'm like, well,
here we go.
We got some acoustics in here, but thank you everyone for listening to me read that short little bit.
Oh, so as I was just getting ready to say, so we're starting to see the chat light up. So thank you all. That was one of the things that I wanted to share was please be interactive, say hi, say yay.
You are all
let Nicole
so
know and me that you are out there. Yes. So what I will say is you should have at the bottom of your screen a little area called Q&A. Please feel free to put some questions in there. Although I've prepared questions to kind of get the conversation going with Nicole and I, we certainly want you all to be able to participate as well. You can also put them in the chat, but they might get lost for me. So I think putting them in the Q&A would be best. Okay. So we're going to start out by giving Nicole a chance to talk a little bit about processed meats specifically. And so Nicole, my first question for you, or actually I guess more of a direction, is in one sentence, how would you describe this book to someone so that they would want to pick it up?
Oh crap. That's always like it's even shorter than the 2-minute elevator pitch.
I know, I'm being super mean.
Tori House did a really good job, and they came up with the subtitle Food, Flesh, and Navigating Disasters. Really good. I think this is never going to sell books when you think about it this way, but this is what I love about nonfiction is this book traces the way that I have imagined the world ending every 15 minutes in 150,000 ways.
I like it. Yeah. Okay. So with that, what was the starting point or inspiration for this book? Was there like one specific image, a voice, a concept, a dilemma, something that made you really just dig in with this whole idea?
Yeah, that's it. And I love that question, Cori, because this book, although it takes place chronologically, it wasn't written chronologically. And the essays that swirl around Zoe's birth and moving from Salt Lake City to Michigan, which was, almost 13 years ago now, were really the beginning of the book. Thinking about leaving, Salt Lake City is a vortex for any of you who've been there and have tried to leave. You always come home, and it was really hard to leave that first time, especially with a new baby. And that was, that idea of leaving Salt Lake. And all of my friends had just graduated from graduate school. And we were all going different directions, and one of my friends who lived in Alaska was like, well, Michigan, it's like Alaska in a lot of ways. It's coming back to its natural state. It has so much water. It's really cold. There's only so much humans can do to push against the bigness of nature there. And it was really exciting to think about living by water. And as Cori, as you know, Quench Your Thirst with Salt is really a lot about water and water issues and water rights in the West. And this book, it still has that concern about the environment and concern about, water issues, but it expands beyond sort of those sort of local issues like Quench does. It's not only about Salt Lake. It starts to think about all the different ways that calamities can happen. So that's what I would say. It began with thinking, moving from Salt Lake calamities to global calamities.
Sure. Well, and I will say, one of the reasons that I always enjoy your work is and this one, I think your newest one really showcases this, is you have this really amazing ability to kind of move seamlessly between personal narrative and facts and statistics, and you do it in such a way, like you move from chicken to giving birth to, you know, toxins and meat, and it just flows all together. And I sometimes stop because you kind of blow my brain, and I'm like, whoa, what did she just do? And I have to go back and kind of look at that. But you do it amazingly well. So how did if you could talk a little bit about that, like how do you connect the dots in a
Yeah.
way that makes sense between all these things that are related but yet not related?
Thank you, Cori. I mean, I think that is, you know, and in some ways that's my biggest struggle. But I feel like there are, I guess I come to the environmentalist movement from this point of view of don't preach at me, don't tell me what to do. I mean, I have that core sort of feeling of, you know, American individualism that says, don't, you know, don't tread on me, don't limit me. I am, you know, I am this land and I can do whatever to it I want. Of course, knowing better than that, but there's this, you know, this sort of visceral part of me that has that manifest destiny built into it. And but I deeply believe that a different mindset has to take place for us to do anything about the environment, to anything about climate change, anything about, you know, even income inequality, you know, the problems that are manifest right now are so deeply entrenched in that idea of I'm going to get mine, don't worry about yours.
Mhm.
And recognizing that, right, has been really, I think the method to my writing is I know that I can be a jerk and a selfish asshole and possessive and want to own things and want things, you know, want nobody um, to impede me in any way. And then to know that that is the exact wrong behavior. To, you know, when I write is I try to flesh it out. I try to put it on the page and be as honest as I can about myself and say, okay, these are my flaws. Maybe if I lay them bare, I can see ways that makes an impact on climate, or makes an impact on what foods I eat, or makes an impact on plastic waste.
Mhm.
And it doesn't change it. You know, I'm not there yet. I'm not at this point where I feel like, okay, if everybody were just like me, we'd be doing great. In fact, I think that it's more like if everybody could admit that they too are fallible and hypocritical and often selfish, that maybe we could say, okay, but once we admit those things, then what do we want to do? Then where can we meet? Where can we share? Where can we come together? And so that's sort of how I write, is in that same way. It's like, okay, a mess of self. Okay, what else is there? What can bring me a little bit of peace? What could bring us a little bit of peace? What could bring us together? And so is that interior look, you know, you look really deep down at the nuggets inside and then try to look up and broaden my view. And that, you know, you can get dizzy sometimes. I mean, I do think it's one of the difficulties of my work sometimes is you look close and then you look up, and you look close and you look up. Sometimes that head moving, that head bobbing can be troubling. But I do hope that in doing that, it invites other people to do it themselves and to meet me, you know, at those other moments and say, yeah, okay, I too suck in these ways, but maybe we can get together in these other ways at these other moments.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. And I think, you know, hearing you say that, I'm like, of course, that's why I'm drawn to it. And, you know, my background is sustainability as well. And that was often my approach too, whether it was my colleagues or the college students that I was trying to convince to make positive changes. You know, I would say I'm human too. Here's the things that I screw up all the time. Here's the things I wish I didn't do. And I think, yeah, bringing that human, you know, not being better than everyone else type of thing is really important, showing kind of your personal flaws and the things you're still aspiring to do. And yeah, it comes out really well in your work. So,
Thanks.
um, so, and this kind of ties into, I'm going to try and tie two questions together here. How did the writing of this book evolve with the advent of COVID? It's certainly referenced throughout. And then I also kind of tied into this, and you can answer them separately. Um, Darcy Falk asks, how has the past year affected your writing process?
Really nice.
And so kind of those two things together, how did this come to light in your book, and how in just in general does this affect your writing?
Oh, I love that question. Thanks, Cori, and thanks, Darcy. Um, I think that the book had existed in a lot in a form pre COVID, and it again the chronologically it begins with Y2K and that disaster, that sort of imaginary disaster. But it seemed like, I mean, this might sound very woo woo and very superstitious in a way, but some part of me feels like this book was waiting for something else to try to understand. And I think one of the, I mean, it's not that the climate crisis isn't really a crisis. It's a crisis for a lot of people, most of them not in the United States, right? In a lot of other places. But that climate crisis is really happening. And even with Zoe, and Zoe going to the hospital was a crisis for our small family. But what I think the pandemic was able, that the book was saying, there is a crisis that is not imaginary and is not far away, that people can understand and begin to, of course, my really vast hope is that we see how we were so, at least at the beginning of the pandemic, so able to care about each other, and our concerns for each other were that communal sense of, hey, I'm gonna wear a mask, or I'm not gonna fight about going to school this week, I'm gonna take it easy. That sort of fell apart toward the, definitely in the summer, and maybe even still. But there's something that the pandemic showed that gives me great hope for future crises, is that when the government really wasn't working, wasn't efficient, couldn't handle things, people came together. There's this group in Flagstaff that goes every Thursday to a different shop or a different restaurant, and there's about 50 of them, and they spend $20 each on a Monday and a Thursday, and they just do it to one restaurant, one shop. And it's just these weird little coalitions that come together and said, okay, we're gonna try to fix this. There were all those people that were stitching masks, and they were saying, this is what I can give. And there was this, early on, there's this feedback, masks aren't gonna do anything. And, you're wasting your time. But people are like, I don't care. It makes me feel like I'm doing something. To me, these are indications that we can be better than that manifest destinies version of ourselves, that we can come together. And I think that the book is grateful to, I mean, one shouldn't be grateful for a pandemic, but I think the book is better for having learned that lesson, having understood that can happen, and that there is a pretty thick and deep part of us that's willing to go out and do things for other people. But that didn't answer Darcy's question, which is, how's my writing changed over the pandemic time? And I've just gone crazy, Darcy. I'm sorry to say. I want to write more than I want to do anything. I guess there's something about not having a social life that helps this. But I write like 2 hours a day now, and I don't know. Like, I should be making masks. I should be, going and spending money with the coalition that spends $20 at the restaurant and $20 at the little shop. But I'm really inside my head, I think, and there's a lot of time to think, I guess, and that's been, I don't know if it's good for my writing, but it's good for my writing time. So, thanks, Darcy.
And then I have a question from Miss Chelsea Johnson. Hello, Chelsea. She says, thank you for such a moving and candid reading. Speaking of processing, how long did it take you to process in writing Zoe's fragile babyhood? When were you able to write about it, and how?
Yeah. Thanks, Chelsea. So I just wrote a letter to somebody who's like, that I'm the most impulsive person, and I'm sorry. And so I did. I wrote impulsively. I think there's blog posts from the hospital when I was giving birth about Zoe. I am not very good at sort of, I should probably process this idea. I'm much better at processing tomatoes. I'm really good at curing pancetta in my garage. I'm good at that kind of patience. But it was really revealing to me the difference between writing the blog of the minute by minute and then trying to turn it into an essay. It was, I think in terms of genre, like the reveal, like there was so much more different between blog post and an essay than even between an essay and a poem or an essay and a short story, because blogs are meant to, they're meant to be like this. They're meant to have no filter. They're meant to not be they're meant to be conversational in a way that is anecdotal, and you take with it the voice of the person more than the meaning of the story. And the truth is, giving birth to a baby 7.5 weeks early is an event, but it doesn't inherently have any meaning, right? I mean, it was traumatic and it was scary, but it was just a thing. It was like a car accident. There wasn't meaning behind it. And it took so long for me to understand and to put away that blog and to put away so many of the details of the birth. The birth story in the book is called Antibodies, and it's tied up with this with the science behind botulism and how when you can things you get botulism. And it just took me a while to understand that I needed a filter, and that filter was that braided essay that I love so much, but that the braid of the botulism that made me think, to learn, what does it mean to have a natural birth, and what does it mean to be at risk, and how much at risk are we willing to put ourselves, and what does it feel like to be infected. Those things, bringing in that other story gave Zoe's birth story meaning beyond, I guess, the immediate, meaning of my own tragedy and my own drama.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. Okay, so let's see here. I have two more questions that are kind of related to the writing specifically of Processed Meat, and then I might move into just some general questions about your writing. So this one's from Paige Lambert. It says, "Hi, Nicole. Do you find that writing from the heart of your personal life allows you to come at political issues from a place of greater integrity? 20 years ago, I wrote the memoir In Search of Kinship, which spiraled around family and animal stories, but my desire was to strip politics away from the issues and find common ground with the reader."
It's a really good question. And I feel like I was saying earlier that there's something that can be really preachy about the way people talk about environmentalism, and that it can be a religion through which one must, perform all these catechisms to be fully a member of the movement. And that just always, didn't sit well with me. I never liked authority. I don't really, I don't like the idea of scripted religions. And so what I feel like I do think it's a bit of a method to put one's personal story out to gain access to people that might have a different political view. And it's really, I feel, okay, let me scroll through the people who are here. Just checking. Okay, just making sure. I think I have some friends that love my writing and my work, even though they don't fall on the same political spectrum I do. And I don't know what that means necessarily. I don't love that I haven't persuaded them to my side. Like, okay, but wait, I wrote this book so you would, become, like a super liberal person. But even if they don't become the world's most super liberal person, I do think they have a interest in the environment that they might not have otherwise. And so the personal story leads them into being interested in me, and then they're interested in my concerns. And again, most of my concerns, I don't think I I don't mean to necessarily keep them away from really big issues, but I do tend toward the environmental issues, and I do champion them most. And so by caring about those particular political issues, which, you know, aren't necessarily like social issues or monetary issues, that I can get them on my side in that manner. So is it tricking them? That's not quite what I think, but I do think there's an element of giving myself up a little bit, giving a little of myself so I can meet them halfway, which sounds like similar to what you were trying to do, Paige. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Nicole. And then Zach asks, how did you take care of yourself while writing this book, since it's so focused on anxiety and many of these are related to ongoing social and political issues? And so what was that self-care factor for you in
Yeah.
writing about past and present crises in your life?
Oh, I don't have any self-care plans. Zach, I drink red wine and I run. And my running is very slow. You know, I do think routine, this is very, it connects with Darcy's question about, you know, how I've been writing lately. And routine really does, I think, keep me sane. And that's been one thing that's been hard about the pandemic, is one could have no routine, but because I am so rigid in this way, which you wouldn't think I'm particularly rigid. I mean, I write in a sort of sprawling, and as you were saying, Cori, you know, this associative manner that pulls in, you know, is a myriad of subjects. I run with the dogs on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we take water out to the bull in the forest for the lynx. And at 5 o'clock, we start making dinner. You know, I just have really rigid parts of my days, which must give me that sort of comfort that the world is going fine. It's all fine, Zach. It's going to be fine.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Routine and structure. We realize how important it is when it's taken away from us. Yeah. Well, I wanted to transition just a little bit, which you've been kind of alluding to along the way, into just kind of a little bit about your writing life. And so, one question I was curious about is, what is an early experience when you learned that language and words have power?
That's such a great question. That's going to take me a minute.
Take your time.
I mean, you know, that question usually comes in the form of, you know, what book was your first one, or when do you remember first writing? But I love this idea of what words meant something to you. And, you know, I mean, the best thing is, like, my great grandmother and my grandmother and my mom, all August long, would put up peaches and pears and pickles. And we would get in their way. Me and my sisters would get in their way. My sisters and I, Mom, sorry. My sisters and I would get in their way all the time. And my grandma, my great grandma, would say like things like, "Why don't you go play in the freeway?" You know, and my other grandma would be, you know, you know, sarcastic about how hot it was. You know, they'd say, "Oh, you know, my hands are made out of Kevlar." There were these, I think, fundamentally funny ways of dealing with stress and dealing with you know, hardship. And I think my entire family takes things kind of you know, at a glance, or it takes a slant, as Emily Dickinson would say, and tries to make something conversational about it. And so I'm gonna go with my great grandma telling me, "Why don't you go play in the freeway?" was the moment where I was like, I should become a writer. See if my mom put anything bad about
I love
that.
that. That's great.
She did it. Mom, feel free to comment. Okay.
Um, so so in your opinion, what are the most important elements of good writing?
So, you know, I really think, I mean, I've been teaching now for 15 years, been teaching creative writing. And in every semester, it feels like there's a new revelation that, oh, now I see it. Now I see where it's really at. And I love that about teaching, right? And if I ever had one rule or one clear idea about what made good writing, well, I'd either be a millionaire or I'd be the world's most boring teacher, or I'd be both, right? And but that image that you described, Cori, I think is really, really I think forms the fundamentals of how I think writing is really interesting. And people say, show don't tell, and I think part of that's true. And I love always telling my students, put more scene in there, zoom in, get some more details, put some action, get some dialogue, and all of that's true. But I also think it's that connection between looking deeply inside at the small events and the small things that are happening to you personally, and then zooming out and looking up and imagining a larger connection or a larger scope or a larger perspective of it. We were talking today in my poetry class about Natalie Diaz's poems, and she has this line about how the Native people made constellations, and she says, well, they, as they were damming the Colorado River, they pulled out the fish and put them in the sky to save them from the dams, right? And it's like, it's a new cosmology, and it's a new way of thinking. But what I really appreciate is it's taking the real substantive thing, the palpable, edible, livable parts of our lives, and then seeing them for what they are and giving them credit for that, letting them exist in that space for as long as possible, and then looking at them broadly, looking at the big picture, looking how they fit in the scheme of things, or looking at them, with abstractions and perspective and, reverie, and just, riffing on them for a while. I think it's that zooming, that I was showing you the dizziness, when you look really closely at something and then broadly, and closely at something and broadly. And to me, that's where the energy of writing comes from, and where meaning comes from. And I think you can, tell students to, show don't tell, but you don't get a lot of meaning necessarily that way. But with the looking close and looking up, I think you do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think I sometimes forget that, there's certainly, like you referenced earlier, braided essays. And I was like, oh yes, that's what you do. Duh. I forget that there's like terms for that. I'm just like, she does this cool thing where it all interweaves together.
No, I should stop using that word. So it sounds like just this thing Nicole does.
Yeah, it just mysteriously happens that you just
Very Nicole thing.
pull it together. Which actually ties into Lawrence Lenhart had a question for you, and he's playing around with the idea of food here, I think. So he asks, which of your nonfiction techniques is most like a delicacy for you, and why?
That's great, Lawrence. Thank you. What I really, really like is chicken. I talk a lot about chicken in this book. I write a lot about chicken. We eat a lot of chicken because chicken seems like the great compromise, right? Between being a vegetarian and not. You're like, well, it's just a chicken. I mean, I'm sad for the chicken, and I feel bad for the chicken. The chickens are not raised, but if you, eat these, cage-free, fresh air chickens, you feel a little bit better at the world. But so to me, what I love about chicken, though, is the chicken skin. There's this restaurant, or there was, I don't know if it's there anymore, in San Francisco, that just served chicken skin. Like, that was a dish you could order. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. And once I read about that dish as something that you could order, then I was like, that means I can eat as much chicken skin as I want. But what I love about chicken skin, Lawrence, if I may, is the way that, I love its crispiness. I love its fattiness, right? And it's very weird to get both things in one bite, to get crisp and to get fat. And I think that, fat by its nature is oogly and oozy, and crispiness, is well, it's crisp. But to be able to have both in one bite is exactly what I want from my writing, right? And which is to say that I want it to be beautiful and lyrical, but also make a little bit of sense too.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I like how you circled all the way around. See, yeah, that was good. Yeah, and on the fly. Um, so this is from an anonymous attendee. So hello, anonymous. Um, It says, I always feel a little nervous writing about others in my own work, friends, coworkers, and sometimes strangers. I'm curious how you provide agency for those you write about. I think a lot about Zoe and her comfortability with you writing her into your work. I think about how she is someone who, as a baby, is something that cannot tell you not to write about her as a mother, but as a mother who is sharing that experience with her and something that is a topic of meditation for writing. How do you mediate that?
You know, it's interesting that I write less and less about my kids the older they get. And to me, that means that the more and more they separate from me, right? The more that I don't share their body and their brain, the more that I give them or assume that they have autonomy and that I can ask them. I really try hard not to write, you know, I do make fun of Zoe's big head, but I do that to her face. I guess that would be the way where I draw the line is if I wouldn't say it to your face, I wouldn't write it. And there are things I don't write about and things I won't write about other people. For me, I don't have very many boundaries because I do think you know, it's meditative and it's the way through to some of these bigger ideas. As pushing on things I don't want to talk about can help me understand bigger ideas that are hard to explore or explain other ways. But you know, like my mom's here, and I don't know if my sisters are here, but I write about them a lot. And again, I try not to. I don't share stories that they wouldn't feel comfortable telling you. You know, anyone in the audience. And again, thankfully, they're very open people, and they would tell a lot of stories, and they're good at that. And they seem not to begrudge me. For my first book, for Quench, I asked my mom to proofread it as a way of giving her a sort of agency that made her feel like an editor, right? So she could have that experience of dissociating from the events that I'm describing in the book, and think of herself as in that editing and writerly mode, which gives you a different kind of agency, right? It gives you the agency to shape and make the story. So again, you know, I really try hard for Zoe when she's, you know, one, she's not going to tell that story. She's not going to remember. When I give her, you know, my books to read, it's like, I'm like, well, look, didn't make you a baby book, but I wrote a really long book about it. So take this. And she, you know, and they, I wonder too, you know, you grow up with a mom who does that. You take it with a grain of salt, but you know, it's very interesting to see how I do write about them less and less. And we'll see how it goes in the future. If I do what I did with my mom and invite them, you know, if I do write about them again in the future, to ask them to take on the editorial role so they can have that kind of agency.
Yeah. No, yeah. And I think that's a great question. I mean, as I thumb through Instagram regularly, I'm always kind of seeing all these influencers that are documenting their children's lives by the moment on, you know, it's such a public platform. And I always I think about that thing of agency, but I think, you know, what you've done is a little different too. So,
Well, and yeah,
um,
I wouldn't do it. You know, I don't post Zoe's picture on Facebook without asking anymore. And that's the similar line, you know, that I draw. Like once they feel that sort of presence of other people looking at them is probably a good time to start asking them what they want.
yeah, ask their permission. Yeah, I think you're right. So I have a couple I'm going to try and tie two questions together that are related to poetry. So this is from Aaron Wall, and I'm sorry if I say this wrong, but Simel Edwards.
Camille.
Samil, say thank you.
Mhm.
So basically, Aaron wants to know, how do you see the practice of poetry informing your creative nonfiction? And then Samil asks, how do you feel that the essay does what poetry would not allow to happen for processed meats?
Oh,
So,
I love that. Thanks, Erin, and thanks, Camille. You know, it's I we were reading a poem today in class, and I came to a new understanding of nonfiction. So the student wrote a poem, and then she had a note at the bottom, and that's sort of how I see creative nonfiction in its most lyric way working, is that you lyrically riff and then you explain, or then you provide context, or you provide some housing for that lyricism. And there's more and more books of poetry you'll see that have so many notes at the back, so much explanation, or so many resources, that if you do read between the line of the poem and the note itself, and then back and forth like that, it starts to read a lot like creative nonfiction. And I would say, that we get getting into conditions of truth is probably beyond the scope of this conversation, but there is that same kind of truth that you're looking for in lyric poetry and in lyric essays that you are looking for in poetry, and that impetus to discover and to peel back and make these associative leaps that drive you to a new way of understanding, a new perspective that you couldn't have got if you weren't letting your brain operate associatively, if you were asking it to please only work logically, please only make absolute pure a didactic sense. You wouldn't get to this new way of thinking. And so to me, poetry, believing in poetry, believing that poetry is maybe to me the truest craft in terms of a way of finding a particular kind of truth. Nonfiction is, I think, the way that you invite more people in, where you say, okay, don't be scared of this lyricism or these gaps and these leaps that don't totally make sense, and these images that just stand out in space without connective tissue. The notes bring in this connective tissue, and I really have just learned to love writing the connective tissue, to making those weird links visible, and so that's sort of how I think of creative nonfiction. It makes the links visible in poetry.
Oh, I love that. Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah. Thanks, Camila and Erin. I hope I answered
right.
both.
So let's see, how are we doing time-wise? Okay. So real quick, so I want to make sure I get to all audience questions, and then I want to move into the fun questions, which I know you were excited about. So again, I'm going to probably slaughter this. I'm sorry. Delisa?
Yep.
She says, hi, Nicole. You described that routine is important to your daily life. Is 2 hours writing a time you put into your schedule? Is there a schedule or certain amounts of time you devote to brainstorming, drafting, revising, etc.? So a little bit about just kind of how do you structure your time for making sure you get things done with writing?
That's such a good question, Delisa. And I wish I were as structured as I said that I was. But what, I've begun to be really good at sneaking time. So it used to be that I would save, Fridays for writing. And that was pretty much all I could, and maybe sometimes Wednesdays. So I could do Wednesday and Fridays, but a lot of meetings happen. Actually, they get filled up both days. But the problem was that the meetings would fill up, and then that would cancel out the writing day. Like 4 meetings, no writing. 4 meetings, 2 meetings, no writing. So and then I wouldn't write on teaching days, and so this year, and maybe it's because I don't have to travel, and there's not the business of transitioning from one station to another, that my brain is willing to not transition between one mode or another. So I can, before I teach now, I have an hour to spare. I'll spend it writing, as opposed to goofing around on Facebook or driving to work, because that's been really a bonus. So I do think I've salvaged and he's cheated a little time out of the system, but I really hope that I can maintain this cheating of time, and saying, what, it's 4. Usually I'm like done working by 4. I'll check emails and stuff, or write emails, but it's like, hey, it's 4 o'clock. I don't have to do anything for an hour. I'm going to type, and I like to call it typing instead of writing. That makes it feel less onerous, and less like I'm doing a sacred thing. I'm like, no, I'm just going to type for a while, and that really helps. And as far as revising, I revise when I have to, and as you know, Delisa, it's not my favorite mode. But now that I've been thinking about revising in a new way, I'm having new thoughts where it's adding another layer, and so you're really just writing again. That idea of, instead of revising, you're rewriting. That's been helping.
All right. Ready for some fun
Yeah, I'm
questions?
ready.
Random stuff.
Okay.
All right, here we go. What is your favorite word and why?
Oh my God. I'm gonna say moist. No. That was like my total Muppet head. Ha! Speaking of Muppet heads, my children completely abandoned me in the Muppet department. So my favorite word is not moist. I love facetious because it has all the vowels in order. I'm a very
Oh,
practical person.
oh my gosh, I love
Um,
that. I didn't know that.
it's a fantastic word. I remember Jackie Osherow in my poetry course at the University of Utah said we couldn't use the word delicate or gossamer. And I really loved that. I'm like, yes, I will never use those words. So those words are bad. I like words that have a lot of consonants and just sound like the thing they are. So not like automatopoeia, which I think are great, like whisper and okay,
Buzz.
not whisper, buzz. Thank you. I'm like, I have one bottom up here, but the thing they almost look and feel like the thing they are, almost like the word book, right? Book feels like it has inside those the words inside the covers. B and K are the covers, and the text is the two O's, or the word crumple. Crumple is great because it looks like there's so many consonants that they're kind of attacking themselves, and it kind of has onomatopoetic qualities. Bark. I love words that like again all those consonants, but also bark sounds like what it is if you're a dog, but also can be the bark of a tree. So I like words that are homophones. I could go on with homophones. So yes, I'm going to say anything that's a homophone.
I like it. All right. Okay. What is a book that you would have everyone read if you could?
Beloved is the best book ever written by Toni Morrison. I just reread
Oh wow.
it. It does this thing, and it does this thing with it recovers some of the imagery from lynching. That seems like an impossible task, but it seems to manage that. It has it does something, I think, with women's bodies that makes them something other than just fertile sources of life. It gives them, their fertility is not always a good sign, and maternity is not always something to be welcomed. But that book is awesome. I think I just read Louise Erdrich, who writes these incredible books, right? The Beat Queen and the Roundhouse, and just every book she writes is incredible. But I read this one called The Master Butcher's Choral Club. I can't even remember because it's such a weird title, but now I have to look it up. But this book is actually looks at her German heritage as much as her Native American heritage, and the Master Butcher's Singing Club. Thank you, Internet. And this book, it just goes on, and there's not a climax to the plot, and there's not a real grand story, but just the characters are rich and invested and integrally related. Oh, and at the same time, I read that, and then I read Beloved, and I really did like the Vanishing Half, which is Brett Bartlett. Is that her name? That was an incredible book. And I sent that to my sister, my twin sisters, and it's about these twins, and it goes through these generations. I don't know. I've been reading a lot of novels. Oh, but the really, 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 really best book ever is I just sent this to my other sister. So I sent The Vanishing Half to my one twin, and the Braiding Sweetgrass to my other. My other sister is she's a biology and environmental science AP teacher at Taylorsville High in Utah, and she has that same capacity, sort of recognizing like the amazingness of these plants and these of the ecosystems that things immersion, but then she also has this really interesting balance of how she brings those stories into her life. Like she's excited by brine shrimp, and I love that. And so I'd say Robin Wall Kimmerer's Writing Sweetgrass. Oh, we talked about that. That's the book I bought, Cori, when I saw you last. I
That's right, because you got the really nice hardcover. Yes, you're
got the
right.
fancy.
Yes.
I was very happy to get that. So I don't know. Those are off the top of my head. I could go again. I am one of those people that loves almost every book.
All right, we're at 8 o'clock, but I want to ask you one last question that I think is really important because it's food related. So it's kind of the classic one, but with some follow-up questions with it. What 3 people would you invite to a dinner party? Because we're talking about food. But most importantly, what would you prepare for them and what would you talk about with them?
Oh my gosh. Well, I would invite Anthony Bourdain because I miss him the most.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. Just me and Anthony. On a boat. We'd be on a boat and I'd be paddling. And I would make him. So I really am interested in gelatins. There's an essay in the piece about beef jello. And once Brady Udall, who teaches at University of Idaho, he's related to the Udalls. He wrote The Lonely Polygamist. He's this great writer. He came to town and I decided that I would have, instead of having like that hosted dinner that the universities pay for, that I would host the dinner. And so I made, I didn't make beef jello, but I made this aspic with these like beef products like hovering inside. And then you have to warm the dish and flip it out, and then it's supposed to stay solid, but of course mine melted a little, which reminds me of Lawrence Lenhart's baby shower when I made this really fancy. Anyway, I like to make really fancy foods, and they generally fall apart. They melt. I'm a melter of fancy foods. So I would invite anyone who would be willing to still eat whatever weird melted product I made. Again, I'd like to cook. I'd like to be adventurous and think that I know what I'm doing, and often I don't. Okay, so who else besides Anthony Bourdain? I'm going to invite one more person. Well, I would invite. Do you know who I wonder what is happening with? Is Carrie Hume. Does anybody remember her? She wrote The Bone People, and she's this New Zealand writer who wrote about this Maori kid who found her and tried to live with her for a while. And she won the Booker Prize and then disappeared. And I want to invite her to see why she stopped writing, because it was one of my favorite books. Oh, and the other person I would invite is Natalie Diaz, who I got a text from the other day, and I was like, yes, Natalie texted me at 8 a.m. I'm ready for the day. So I would love to have Natalie and her partner up for dinner, and that's on the off chance they're listening and they want to come. Okay.
There you go. You've extended the invitation.
Exactly.
So, well, Nicole, this has been great. You have shared so much lovely information about yourself and your writing and your new book, which everyone needs to go get. This will make some people cringe. Ooh, last question. Dog ears or bookmarks?
Doesn't it just depend? I mean, I'm all about dog ears. It depends on how much the book costs. That's so materialistic of me.
Yeah,
and it depends on the quality of the paper.
That's true. I got this one for free, so I can make everyone cringe with all the dog ears that I put in here of all the great things that Nicole said that I wanted to go back and revisit. So, ooh, good one.
This copy of Lab Girl, right? My sister Paige and I both read this. We have dog ears all over it. And then, yeah, my books I'll do. And then once they have anything wrong with them, like here's Natalie Diaz's book. And then I sat it down today on the kitchen table and it got wet. So now it's free for dog ears and writing in. So it just takes a minute. I just need to like break the purity signal, and then I'm all about it.
Yeah.
I also use tissues for bookmarks. I mean,
sure. But you're probably not going to dog ear your really nice copy of Braiding Sweetgrass that you just bought.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. Seriously, go get Nicole's book. It's so amazing. It will make you laugh. It'll make you cry. It is the best. And we love having all of the great questions we had tonight. And hopefully we can gather again, maybe this summer or fall, to celebrate Nicole's accomplishments in person. So
that would be awesome. I'd love to see you all again in person. But again, Zoom brings so many people to Brightside that can't go to Brightside in person because they're not in Flagstaff. And yeah, we should make this happen again in person if we can. And Cori, thank you for reading this. It means so much to me that you've read it so deeply. And thank you all for your really, really smart and fun questions. This is what a book launch should feel like. So thank you for making it happen.
Yeah.
And thanks, Michelle, in the hiding corner, for making it
Yes,
happen.
thanks, Michelle, for making sure that we got everything rolling tech-wise and are the quiet little mastermind behind us. So, all right, everyone. So, good night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.